Welcome to Unity Tips with Cody from Lazy Goblins.
Hey everybody, it is Cody from Lazy Goblins, and in this Unity Tips video, we're going to talk a little bit about attributes. So for me, attributes, what I use them for mainly is to clean up the inspector. So when you create a script and you add it to a game object, and you start to add your variables on there and everything, it can get pretty cluttered. So the main thing I use attributes for is to, clean that up a bit, and I'll show you that here in a little bit. Another thing I use attribute for, I use the serialized field attribute to expose private variables, but we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And we'll show a little bit of a demonstration. So attributes, let's go to the Unity documentation to get a full detail on these. The Unity documentation is very, very good place to look when you are trying to figure something out in Unity. If you're confused, you want to look something up, Unity documentation is usually the place to go, so I would recommend to get familiar with it. Anyways, so Unity attributes. Attributes are markers that can be placed above classes, just like right here, hide in inspector. They can be placed above a class, property, or function in a script to indicate special behavior. So with this hide in inspector, the special behavior for this is it will literally just hide this this variable right here. So because it's public, it gets exposed in the inspector, but since you have hide in inspector, it will hide it in the inspector. That's pretty much what an attribute is. There's a whole bunch of these attributes, and you can find them if you come to the attributes and the Unity documentation. Just click Add Component menu, and it's going to bring you to the attributes dropdown. Oh, I lost it. Oh, there it is right there. Okay. It's going to bring you to the attributes dropdown. And there is a whole bunch in here that you will find. I recommend going through them, testing them out, reading them, get familiar with them. They're pretty handy, pretty good. I'm about to demonstrate some for you right now. And the first one we will demonstrate is the hide inspector, just to, show you exactly what it does. All right, let's jump on into Unity. All right, so here we are inside of Unity. Again, first thing we're going to talk about and demonstrate is the hide inspector. So right now I have all these public variables. I have one right here that's a private, but first we're going to focus on the public ones. Go over here to attributes example, where we have the script. See, we have max health, we have move speed, jump force, attack damage, defense. Cool. Come back to the script, and let's go right above this max health. We'll go hide in inspector, save it. It has to be right above the variable, class, or property, right above it. Come over here, see how max health, compile, and it's gone. Even though it is public, if you put hide in inspector, that totally removes it from the inspector. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is a serialized field. This will make a variable show up in the inspector when it's private. And that's mainly what I use it for. There are also some fields that can't be serialized, which you can find in the documentation. But for right now, we're just going to stick to basic variables. So we have this private float health right here. We're going to go serialized field, save it, and come back. And now you see health. And again, just to demonstrate it, we get rid of it. Health will disappear. And health is gone. So you can see how that could be very useful. If you don't want other scripts to access some of your variables, but you still want them to be exposed in the inspector, serialized field is a great way to do that. Okay, so the next one we're going to go over is space. And what space does is it allows you to put space in between the variables. So see, we have right here health. Let's actually bring back the max health. Get rid of that hide in inspector for now. So max health is now back. So we have max health, health, move speed, jump force, attack damage, and defense. These can generally be split up into their own categories. So the top can be all the health stuff that relates to health. The move speed and jump force can be in their own thing because it relates to movement. and how the character would move. Attack and defense could also be in their own little section because, it relates to combat. So we'll go into here, and you're going to want to put it, we want it between the health and the movement variables, right? So what we do is we see that we want it right between health and move speed. So we'll go right above move speed, and we'll put space, parentheses, and in these parentheses you put a number, and this is the amount of pixel space between the variables. So we'll just go with 10. We'll come back to Unity, and see it put 10 pixels right there. You could, just to demonstrate, you could put 100, and it puts 100 pixels. Don't recommend putting 100, but we'll do that again for the combat variables. Put space of 10. It'll compile, and boom, it's a little bit more organized now, right? So that's another one I use a lot to separate stuff. It's good for not only yourself, but if you're working with designers. Like right now, me and Johnny, we're working on our game, and I'm the programmer and he's the level designer. So if he needs to mess around with the player, any move speed or anything like that, he doesn't have to kind of, hurt his eyes to find out where everything's at in the jumbled mess. You could space things out, and it'll be easier to read. So the next one we're going to do is we're going to do a header. A header will basically add text above the variables or fields in the inspector. So now we are going to demonstrate the header attribute. Go header, do some parentheses, and it takes a string. We'll just put health variables, just keep it simple. Go to Unity, let it compile, and see right above it, it puts health variables. And then we'll do the same for the others. There is one thing you need to be aware of. If you have a space like we do right here, make sure it's above the space. I'll show you why here in a bit. So on this one, we'll put it below the space, and we'll just type this one out instead of copy pasting. Header, parentheses, combat variables. All right, so let's go back to Unity, and I'll show you why you want to put it above the space. So on the movement one, we have it above the space, and on the combat one, we have it below the space. So if you put it below the space, it will put the space in between the header and the others. But if you have it above it, then there won't be any space in between it, and it looks a lot cleaner. So let's just take that, get rid of that, bring it back down, and we'll put it above the space so it looks nice and clean. Cool, now it's easier to find out which kind of variables you want to be adjusting. So if you look for the health, you can see right there, boom, here's the health variables. So it's nice, clean, organized, and easy. So the next attribute we're going to talk about is the range attribute. This will create a slider for the float or int variable that will have a min and max value. Min will be the first parameter we add, and the max will be the second. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll do it for the move speed. We'll do range. Min will be 5. Max will be 25. So this is going to be the min, since it's the first parameter. And the max is the second parameter, and we put 25. Go back into Unity right now. And we have a slider. If you go on it, max is 25, the min is 5. So it's really good if you don't want it to go past a certain value. Like if you give it to a designer, for example, again, and you don't want them to go past a certain value or below a certain value, right? So they can adjust, and they have a limit to adjust within. So it's nice for those cases. All right, so the next and final attribute that we're going to talk about is the require component attribute. This attribute will automatically add the component onto the game object that this script is being attached to. This is a really good attribute to use for when the script depends on a certain component and you don't want to forget it. So we'll just do this right here. We'll do require component, another parentheses, you put in type of, and then you put another parentheses and the component you want to be attached to it. So let's just say we needed a rigid body, right? We needed a rigid body for this script. and it depends on having that rigid body, but every time we go to add the script onto a new object, we don't want to forget about that rigid body, right? So if we go create empty and we say new object, just to name it, and we drag this attribute example, it automatically adds the rigid body, which is great. Unfortunately, it doesn't do it right off the bat. So what you could always do is you can remove it, re-add it, and there it goes. It adds it right off the bat. That about does it for this video. There are plenty more attributes for you to check out and mess around with. These are just the main ones that I use. I do recommend, though, heading over and checking out the other attributes in the Unity documentation. I'll provide a link below. I hope you all enjoyed this Unity tip about attributes and can see how they can help you organize and tidy up your inspector. And before I go, I would like to know, what is your favorite attribute? And if you didn't know about attributes before this, which one do you think you will be using the most? Mine personally is a tie between the space attribute and the serialized field attribute. I love the space attribute for separating like variables into sections in the inspector, but having the ability to show a private variable in the inspector with serialized field is just really handy. All right, until next time, everybody, keep creating, and I will see you all in the next video. And that has been a Unity tip by Cody from Lazy Goblins.